Nominating my father, Kenneth J. Myers, who was in World War II with the U.S. Navy, and he served aboard different carriers flying dive bombers. And I'm very proud of his record to have a father as a pilot. And his war record, I'm so proud of it because to have a father that was a pilot in World War II and everything. I mean, I'm so proud of that. And I'd like to remember him. That I haven't seen him in a long time. My parents divorced. I was early age, but I was still in contact with him. And like I said, I want to nominate him because he's still my hero. He was on aircraft carriers, and I remember stories that my mother told me that he had told him that at times the Pacific was very treacherous because the weather could change from good to bad, and if you had to ditch your plane, it was like a tiny speck in the ocean for rescue parties trying to rescue you. And she said in one incident she remembers him saying is after a battle they were flying back to their carrier, and one of their co-pilots, fellow pilots, had to ditch his plane. And he said as they went over, they could see sharks attacking the pilot and his radio operator gunner, and they couldn't do anything about it because they were out of ammunition. And my mom said she remembers, my father, telling her that. Mm-hmm. And then I remember my father saying, and also that, like the Japanese planes were very, very good planes, maneuverable and faster, but our planes were armored, and the Japanese planes weren't armored, and they were easier to shoot down because one single burst of machine gun fire would, destroy the Japanese plane. Where our planes were armored, they could take, punishment better. And he said the Japanese pilots were good pilots, well trained, fearless, but eventually our pilots, turned out to be better toward the end of the war. Mm-hmm. And, we were able to, defeat them. And there's other, I'm trying to think incidents too. He said, flying in the Pacific, it was a big expanse, and you had to be a good navigator so you wouldn't get lost. Because the pilot was actually a navigator and the pilot, flying the plane. And my father flew a dive bomber, and he had a radio operator and a backseat gunner. So it was a two crew member of the dive bombers and everything. Mm-hmm. And then when they landed on the carrier, they had to make sure their arresting hook at the bottom of the plane would catch the cable to slow the plane down and stop it and everything. Mm-hmm. And like I say, he told my mother and my uncle that he did get several confirmed bomb hits on ships, and he shot down a few Japanese planes also. Mm-hmm. And everything. I remember, I think my mother was telling me the reason him and his twin brother joined, because I think she said they had relatives in Germany, and he didn't want to have to face any relatives. That's what I remember my mother saying. So he joined the Navy to fight in the Pacific area.
Okay.
That's what I had heard, if I remember. He must have been late teens and probably went into early 20s, I'm thinking, yeah. Because he went in, young age. And after high school, he went to basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station in Chicago. And then after his basic training, he was accepted for flight school. He went to air cadet school. And then after he got his wings, he was stationed. He went to the West Coast, and he was stationed on flying dive bombers. And then he went on different aircraft carriers in the Pacific. Mm-hmm. But it was also a sense of patriotism too when he joined the Navy after when the war started. To be a pilot, in the Pacific, because I was always like military minded, and I always liked planes and everything. I used to always watch war pictures, and especially in the Pacific. And to have a father to be in these major air battles flying a dive bomber, how many sons can say that, a pilot? And when I read about our Navy pilots, all the battles they won and all the hard fighting they did in the Pacific to win the battles, and my dad was one of them. And, I'm proud of that. He helped to win the war with his mm-hmm. courage and his skill and everything. But like I said, to be a pilot, on an aircraft carrier, and I'm so, proud of that, and mm-hmm. I've been wanting to honor him for a long time like that. Our country, is a great country because of all the fighting men and women. And that's one thing should never, be forgotten and everything. Mm-hmm. And ironically, 23 years later, I was in Vietnam. I was in the Pacific too fighting. Mm-hmm. But to me, the reason we're free and because we have it so good in this country because of our past fighting men and women. regardless if the wars are right or wrong, moral, immoral, whatever. But we should not forget our military veterans, just like the ones today in Iraq, Afghanistan, everything. We shouldn't forget them because there's a lot of sacrifice that the veterans give, you know, to protect this country and try to keep other people safe and everything.
Absolutely.
I'm honoring like the pilots that flew the planes because I mean my heroes were the pilots, and I'm doing this, you know, to honor them for the type of planes they flew, the different type of battles they were in, and like I said, I'm tremendously proud of our pilots. I always liked our pilots, and it's a relaxing hobby. It's, you know, it's tedious work, all this painting, everything, building them, but I mean I enjoy it. I was 17 when I got out of high school, a little bit younger than most. Most were 18. And then I'm figuring, well, I thought maybe the war in Vietnam is going to start ending because it, you know, was going on. Well, as I'm getting 19, I says, you know, the war's, it looks like it's not getting for a while. So I always liked the Marines, so I went in, I enlisted in the Marines for 2 years. And then I went to boot camp in San Diego. And then I went to ITR, which is Infantry Training Regiment. It's infantry training for the Marines. And then, well, actually, I went into boot camp January of '68, and then I went to Vietnam in August of '68. I went home for 2 weeks leave. Then I went to Vietnam in '68, and then I came back in September of '69. And my job, I was what they call 0311. That was infantry. That was my specialty training. I was infantry. And I went there as a rifleman, and then later became a fire team leader and assistant squad leader. And luckily, I never got hit, but I did have malaria for 5 days, which was not it's not the recurring type. And during my tour of duty, I would say 65% of my platoon became casualties. We had 9 killed and about 11 or 12 wounded. And I'm in contact with about 6 of my fellow members of my platoon. They're all over the country, mainly out in the east. But I talk to them every so often, and I share photographs, and I took a lot of pictures when I was there. A lot of them were even on combat, you know, operations. And I have those I share, and I make copies. I send them to my friends. And I mean, thank God I came back alive without getting, you know, crippled or hurt and anything.